People that have gone to jail/prison or worked there, what are your most interesting, funny, scary or gross stories? My granddad was a prison guard in the UK and had numerous stories. One off the top of my head was they had a tea caddy, fella who used to go to each cell and pour the inmates a cup of tea/coffee. He spilt some on the desk of an inmate who was a bit of a bully. Bully boy beat the shit out of the tea caddy and put him on the hospital wing. At first, my granddad was struggling trying to find a new tea caddy to replace him as no one wanted a potential beating. One guy volunteered and his first trip was straight to the bully's cell. He emptied the urn all over his bed, and when the bully tried to attack him, he put him in the infirmary for weeks. I don't believe he ever tried to throw his weight around again after that. Not my story, but I'll do my best to relay it. 2 inmates at a woman's prison had been bullying a third, and in an attempt to stop the bullying, the 2 were split up, putting one of the bullies into a cell on a different wing. In an attempt to get back at the guard who split them up, the inmate who was moved wrote a note about how the officer was being racist and homophobic and chose to single her out for being a lesbian of color, and gave the note to another inmate to hand to a guard, then went back to her cell. One important thing to know is that these cells were heated by a large pipe running through the back of all the cells that was way too hot to touch. The next morning she was found dead with something tied round her neck, her legs burnt from the pipe, and a towel on the floor at her feet. The officer's theory was that this woman had placed the towel on the pipe to sit on with something, I think it was a pair of socks, tied loosely around her neck so that when the guards came round to do a head count they would see this suicide attempt and it would bring more attention to the note she had written. Somehow the towel slipped, she burnt herself and pulled away from the pipe, tightening the noose around her neck. My time to shine. In my younger days, I may or may not have spent some time in a county jail, time served, never actually went to prison. Now, this county jail was severely over capacity. So much so that the mess area was used as overflow, and about 40 of us had to sleep on bunk beds they plopped down in the middle of this big room. Unfortunately, this area had no toilets of its own, so they left one cell open and unoccupied for a toilet for all of us. Bad jail food, 40 dudes, 1 toilet. Not a movie anyone wants to see. Well, I dropped approximately 1/5 of my body weight into that poor toilet, in one extremely dense log. This, much to the chagrin of the guys on the bottom floor cells, caused all of their toilets to back up somehow, flooding their cells with shit water. The guards made us wait outside in the exercise area while plumbers came in. This all happened at like 11:30 at night, in January. No one knows it was me that clogged it all up, which is probably a good thing. TLDR. Got poop water all over a bunch of literal felons. Just thinking of some of the shit I saw in prison makes me feel very strange. I'd relive some of the memories here for small digital clout points, but honestly, it was such a horrific experience I'd rather not regale them. The one that stands out is how homesick I was, and was telling myself that I wasn't. One day I walked from my room, I don't remember waking up, but I walked through my house, my mom was making breakfast. I was adopted by my grandparents, so they were mom and dad to me. I sat down with my elderly father, and he had the strangest look of peace, but a smile. I sat down and we talked. I don't remember about what, but I couldn't get over this feeling of longing. Like I wanted so bad to reach out and hug him, and something just didn't feel right. I felt close to him but so very far away. I looked at him for a very long time and said, "Am I really here right now?" And he said, "I don't know. Are you?" I closed my eyes, then opened them again. I was staring at a blank lime green steel metal wall, and realized I was in prison the whole time. Having a dream of being home with my family. I have never felt so incredibly alone. I don't know if this story is interesting, funny or scary, depends on your perspective, but I was in a pod once where we had a regular CO who was a complete piece of shit. He used to try to provoke inmates into starting a fight so that he and his buddies could kick the shit out of the inmate. He would destroy inmates' belongings for no reason. He ripped up a letter from my dad during a search one time and then bragged to me that he did it. He would fuck with inmates' food. He was complete trash. He thought he was a big, tough dude. So anyway, there were a lot of young gang guys in the pod. Gangs are really good at communicating within facilities. So the gang managed to somehow find out the names of the CO's kids. And communicate that to the pod. So one day the CO came to do his shift and the pod spent the whole time casually name-dropping the kids' names into their general conversation while he was walking by. And that was the last day the CO worked in our pod. Aren't jails just great for reform? I was a college instructor teaching in state prisons for several years. At first, I was a bit anxious about being in that environment. After all, I was in a room with about 24 convicted murderers, rapists, child molesters, and drug dealers. It wasn't exactly a welcoming place. But after about a month, I realized that I had nothing to worry about. I was surprised to find that these guys were willing to put themselves in harm's way to protect the teachers. I had just started my lecture one day when a lockdown was called. Our room was locked from the outside, and we could not move until it was over. We heard, coming from upstairs, what sounded like a riot breaking out. "Teach, get in the corner," one of my guys said, practically pulling me off my feet and pushing me into the corner furthest from the classroom door. The guys then proceeded, without saying a word to each other, to pile all of the classroom desks in front of the door and stand between me and said desks. They were creating a barrier to keep me safe. It turns out that the riot we heard was not as big as we feared, so the lockdown only lasted about an hour. Afterward, once we got the okay and the room was put back in order, I asked the guys why they did what they did. "Some motherfucker hurts you," one of the guys said. "All the teachers will leave. We don't want to lose our education because some assholes can't control themselves." I've worked in a prison for some time in medical. What surprised me more than anything else is how many inmates have serious mental illnesses and below normal IQ. Like, no matter how bad and common you may think it is, it's really bad and even more common. A lot of them don't even belong in prison. They definitely shouldn't be out on the street, but they and society would benefit a lot more from keeping them in an environment where they can get real treatment. Prison makes them so much worse. I'll tell you a story. One time, one such inmate was having a fit and asking to speak to someone from behavioral health. Well, it was night shift and we didn't have any behavioral health professionals on duty at the time. So I agreed to go talk to him. He was a black male in his 30s. Past violent offender. It turned out that he was angry because he had gotten moved from one cell to another and his radio had gotten damaged and some of his stuff was missing. He was frustrated and didn't feel like he was getting an explanation. The inmate thought it was because everyone hated his music. "They always be complaining about my music and that's why they broke my radio," he said. And to emphasize the point, he turned the radio on full blast with one of Duran Duran's songs playing. When he turned it off after a few seconds, I remarked, "Well, I think that's outrageous. Who would have a problem with Duran Duran?" That got him. "You like Duran Duran?" "Oh yeah. My sister was their biggest fan in the 80s. Play them all the time," which means I was listening too. The inmate's mood changed and he showed me his property form that had everything and asked me to verify that the radio was recorded as undamaged on the form. As I looked at it, I noticed that he had a box of crayons listed among his property. I asked him what sorts of things he draws and colors. The inmate pulled out a folder containing some blank coloring pages that he had of various things. I saw one picture of an owl and mentioned that I like owls. He told me he'd color it for me. "I'll tell you what then. If you will promise to color that owl for me, I will come back tomorrow and visit you to see how you're doing. Deal?" He agreed to it. The next day, I showed up and the guy was absolutely jubilant. The owl was perfectly colored and he insisted that I take it. He couldn't stop talking about it either and he remarked somewhere in the middle, "All my life, my folks told me not to trust white people, but you did what you said you would." It was such a small damn thing, and it mattered to this man to the point that it made him question the negativity that may have led him to the hard place he found himself in. I will never forget how happy he was right then. For my part, I still have that owl picture hanging on my refrigerator. Edit because people have asked, "The owl?" Like this video and subscribe to Web Convos for more Reddit stories.